Oh, you're sweet. Okay, so we have somebody in Vegas, 3 locals, and 1 person in Ohio. And I'm going to, you guys don't have to mute yourself, but if you've got background noise, you may want to mute and then unmute if you have a question. All right, so we're going to get started. And this is, like I mentioned, picking up from my nutrition seminar 1.0. Any questions that you have along the way, I want you to, this is an interactive conversation that I want us to be having, because this is going to be a little bit of a complicated explanation of some things that happen inside of our body. So we want to make sure that we're kind of understanding it. I made it as simple as possible. Okay, so the Nutrition Seminar 1.0 that you guys have all seen was about the magic pill, right? And we all know now, because we saw in my presentation, what the magic pill is, and that's whole food nutrition. The other things that we discussed were the 2 aspects to help support whole foods, which one is label reading, which everybody on this call is getting very proficient with label reading because you guys text me, we talk about it. It's not an easy concept. We are trained to read grams of proteins, grams of fats, grams of sugars, grams of sodium, grams. We're trained to read those things. When all of that doesn't matter, it gets thrown out the window, because really what we're looking for is, what is our food made of? That's the most important thing first. So if it's made of whole food ingredients, that's a keeper. If it's made of, we're not really sure, that we throw out. And you guys have all of you on this call have texted me and asked me, is this good? Is this not good? And it's a learning curve. The other aspect is the whole food of meal prepping. So meal prepping, we know, is a way to make healthy foods convenient. And that's why fast foods and processed foods are so successful, because they've made it easy for our fast-paced lives. And we have to make this healthy food convenient, and no one's going to do it for us but us. And it's hard, and it takes time to get used to it, but we can do it, and it just takes practice. So that was kind of a recap. This seminar is going to be about the human experience. So we're just going to go into detail about how our bodies operate with these different macros that make up our foods. So let's talk about the human. So this lovely man on the left, he's so cute. That's primitive man. So primitive man dates back 50,000 years before the Common Era, or if you believe in Christ, 50,000 years before Christ was born. That's where the Stone Age, where we have some recordings of human existence. And the primitive man goes from then all the way up to this man on the right, who is 1800s. So he is where we start changing into the modern man. But from the time of primitive man to modern man, basically for 52,000 years, we all ate the same way. We did not evolve very much. Everything was what we could get inside of our area is how we ate. So that would be different from people from the northern continents versus the southern continents. But it never changed. 52,000 years. A long time. Now, what did they eat? They ate anywhere from wild game, fish, things they could gather, like plants and fungi, seaweeds, berries, things that were in season. So that's important to make note of. They didn't have berries year round. They didn't have vegetables year round. but they also started learning how to cultivate things. So they planted some root vegetables, which root vegetables are very, they're easy to grow in different climates. So those became very popular. Different fruits they were able to cultivate. But this was basically it of what they ate for 52,000 years. Now let's look at what modern man likes to eat. So this is a picture. I mean, I know this is, pretty funny, right? I mean, this is not the only things that we eat, which is burgers and cupcakes, but you get my point. Modern man started around the time of the Industrial Revolution, which was around 1840s. So, but right around the year 1920 is when things started changing for the human. And that's what we're going to label modern man. So modern man was from 1920 to now. So what happened in 1920? Well, World War I happened, World War II happened. We had to start making food for our troops. We had to make food transportable. The baby boom happened, which means population increased. So what happened there? We started growing cash crops. Cash crops meant farmers started, instead of growing everything they needed to eat, they started specializing in wheats, corn, soys to feed the masses. So scientists all started coming together to change how the crop seed was mass produced to make this more efficient and economical. After the 1920s, women started working. The invention of the computer happened. Life became busier. The grocery store became more abundant. So all of this resulted in processed foods taking over the market and making things cheaper, easier, faster. So what are processed foods mostly made of? Wheat, soy, sugar, and manufactured chemicals. So now let's think about what we've just went over. From 50,000 years before Christ was born, or before the Common Era, to the year 1920, we ate a certain way. Now, for the last 200 less years, we have been eating this way that I just described, processed foods with the wheats, the sugars, the manufactured chemicals. Our bodies are not adapted to be eating this way. We're still kind of inside of our bodies, our makeups are still wanting that 52,000 years of how we were eating. So what's happening with this is it's causing a world of health issues. The gut health is one of them. So there's a system of microorganisms that live inside of our stomach and intestines. And the balance of these microorganisms is crucial to our health. It helps metabolize our nutrients. It helps synthesize all of our foods. And when gut bacteria is off, inflammation responses start happening. And you guys probably have all heard me talk about inflammation. It is a real thing that happens inside of our bodies. I could tell you so many stories. It's not pounds, it's actual weight gain due to inflammation. And this is happening because our gut health is off. Now, I go into more depth on this one in the next seminar. So this is a 3-part series, because I could talk about this one all day long. But for this one, I want to really focus on, for the seminar 2.0, I'm focusing on the processed food shift and how this has brought about a consumption of carbohydrates into our intake. So let's look at that. You guys have all heard me say that, before I go on, does anybody have any questions about what we've covered so far? No? Okay. So you guys have all heard me say that a food is made up of one of these 3 things, or a combination of these things. But there's nothing more, nothing less. There's protein, there's fat, and there's carbohydrates. a food can't be anything more or anything less than these, and it will weigh it. Some have more carbohydrates and some have more protein, some have more fats, blah, blah, blah. Now remember, that's not the most important thing. That is, we want to look if it's a whole food, but the next important thing is to be looking at how we break these macros up. So a typical Western diet will consist of 60% carbs, 25% fats, and 15% proteins. So after the Industrial Revolution began in the 1920s, particularly the beginning of modern man, like we just described, you could see that our percentage of carb intake has gone up. Prior to the Industrial Revolution, carbohydrates were made up of a much smaller portion of our macros, and proteins and fats dominated our fuel source. So part of the reason this, to make matters worse, was in the 1950s, heart attacks were on the rise by a very fast rate. In 1955, President Truman had a heart attack and people wanted answers. And since 1920, carbs started coming up, fats started coming down, protein started coming down, but it didn't look like this. Then after 1955, the processed food industry hired a scientists and helped them find answers, because there's a long story behind it. I have lots of research and documentation, but they were actually paid off by the sugar industry. But the scientists deemed that fats were the reason why people were having heart attacks. So in walks the fat scare of America that still exists today. You'll hear people all the time, especially people of our parents' generation, say, I can't have that many fats, that's bad for me. This is where that came from. The sugar industry and the processed food industry actually hired scientists to take the pointer off of them and put it onto something else, and that was fats. So let's recap. The rise, since 1920s, the rise of the cash crop, the rise of processed foods, the new concept that fats are evil, and this has only been happening for a small period of time. This percentage wheel is what our food intake looks like. Very interesting, right? So let's look at what the carbohydrate intake. So now we know that it's 60% of our intake as modern man. Let's look at what the carbohydrate intake comes from. So primitive man's carbohydrates were small, right? They were like 15% of their intake in primitive man. And inside of that 15% of carbohydrates, 99% of their carbs came from vegetables, fruits, roots, legumes, and nuts. 1% came from grains, cereal grains, or grains, so to speak. In modern man, the carbohydrates are now up from 15% to 60%, and they are 59% refined grains. So not only are we upping the carbs, we're also shifting the carb source away from vegetables and away from fruits, away from legumes and nuts. And we're now introducing way more grains and way more artificial sugars and sweeteners. So that's really a snapshot of how our carbs have shifted. And just to give you a definition of what a refined grain is, and this is important, refined grain is the term used to refer to grains that are not whole because they're missing one or more of their three parts, which is the bran, the germ, or the endosperm. So white flour and white rice are refined grains, for instance. Refining a grain removes about half of the protein source, 2/3 of the nutrients, leaving it mainly just a shadow of itself. It's really just a calorie. That's all it is. All right. So now, why do I tell you all this? Yeah, go ahead, please.
Okay, so what's the deal with the white potato? Being that it's white, but it is a whole food?
Mm-hmm.
Because I think it's very much taught that no white potatoes are bad because it falls into the white category.
Yeah, so that's a great question, Donna. The idea that a white potato is the reason why it's been labeled bad is because it has a higher level of impacting your sugar levels. So it's actually a whole food. So a white potato is fine because it is a whole food. It's the portion size that you want to keep down. Okay. So it falls under vegetables, fruits, legumes, and nuts. But if we decrease the portion size of that potato, then we can reduce the amount of spike of insulin we get, which I'm getting ready to go over the insulin, how insulin affects our body, but it reduces the sugar content into our blood. Good question.
Okay, thanks.
Anybody else have any questions so far on that? Okay. So why is all this information important? Because when we take food into our body, it turns the food into fuel for how we operate. So here's where it starts getting complicated, and I tried to make it as simple as possible because this is important for us to understand how all this works, of how the macros affect our blood sugars. Because when we have our blood sugars go up, then we have different responses from the body that happen. So, as you can see, I'm pointing to my screen. You can't see me pointing, but as you can see, the green line is carbohydrates. And the graph here is the left side is the blood sugars, and the underneath side is the time of hours that this takes place. You could see that if you take in carbs, your blood sugar spikes terribly, right? And then it's in a very short window of time. If you eat proteins, then it spikes a little bit, but it's not really that bad. So their blood sugars aren't too bad. And it lasts longer, twice the amount of time as carbohydrates last. And if you eat fats, healthy fats, it doesn't spike at all. That is a very, very low blood sugar spike, and it lasts a really, really long time. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about how the main jobs of, let me see if I don't have it. Okay, let me tell you the main jobs of these three different macros. So protein's main job, doesn't mean it doesn't have two jobs, its main job is the amino acids that are in proteins are broken up when we digest them, and they're used for cell repair and building. So that proteins are important to keep our cells regenerated. Fats, when we eat them, are broken down into two components which repair the cell wall. And I'm going to tell you guys something about fats. Fats has a word in front of it, and it's essential. Essential fats is what we usually call them. And the reason why it has the word essential is because our body cannot produce them from another food source. You have to take in fats because we cannot internally make them. So now I just let you know what the main job for fats are, which is to repair the cell wall. So if you're not taking in healthy fats, you're not repairing your cell walls, which we have to have, right? Now, carbs' main job is fuel. It has really no other jobs besides a fuel source. So because carbohydrates are the number one job, it our body's preferred source of energy, because it doesn't take the body any energy to convert the food to fuel. It's instantaneous, as you can see on this graph. So this is the absolute reason why carbs are addicting, because our body doesn't have to work at it. Okay, now I'm going to go back to those main jobs I just talked about. The protein and the fats they're like, okay, I'm here to work. I have my job. Okay, so they go do their job. But they have a secondary job. Their secondary job is fuel. But it takes the body more work to convert it into fuel. So it spreads that energy out over hours of time. So this is very, very interesting here. Carbs are addicting because they're a quick fix for the body to get fuel. And then the other two can still provide fuel, but it's harder. All right, so this is a really cool understanding of how this works and why it's so addicting to have carbs. Now, I want you guys to think about when you've had a granola bar or bread or a highly carbohydrate food, and that's it. That's all you've had, right? Think about, do you feel full afterwards? And Sherry's shaking her head no. Lauren's saying no. Nope. Jenny's saying no. Donna's saying no. No, you don't. And here, this is why. Because you are spiking your blood sugar up really high, and only for a short period of time, and you're left empty. You're hungry. Therefore, you go and eat again. So now you're addicting to carbs, you're addicting yourself to carbohydrates, you're addicting yourself to needing more food, so now your calories go up, and it's just a vicious cycle that starts happening. So what happens when you eat carbohydrates, or I should say when your blood sugar goes up? That's what this next graph is. Now this graph is extremely complicated. Basically, you could follow this around, but I'm going to tell you what this graph says in a very easy way to understand, okay? You eat food. Food is digested and it's turned into fuel for the body to use. Glucose, which is sugar, is broken down fuel that goes into the bloodstream. And remember what we said, carbohydrates are just that. They are glucose. They are sugar, and they are instantaneously in there for the blood to have. Glucose spikes insulin. So carbs release the most glucose, and that creates the most insulin. Insulin is a hormone that your pancreas secretes, so you could see the yellow, that's what your pancreas looks like there. And the pancreas's job is to produce that insulin, which then pulls the glucose from the cells, and then the insulin is the key to allowing the glucose into your cells. So it's just the key, right? So it says, let me in, I'm knocking on the door of the cell. I want to put fuel into your cell. What happens with diabetics, which I wish Amanda was on the call right now, because and she's our transformation story, so she's told everyone she's diabetic. So she's actually I've given her this she's had this seminar before, because I wanted her to really understand what her body's doing. But when you're diabetic, your insulin is knocking on the door to put glucose into your cells, and your cell is saying, I can't hear you, because it's too tired of listening. It's had too many of those knockings, and it's become immune to hearing it. Even if you're not diabetic and you're pre-diabetic, then this is happening. This is the start of it. And if you haven't had your blood work done recently, I really strongly suggest you go have it done to know if you're in pre-diabetic numbers, because 80 million people in the US alone are pre-diabetic. It's an epidemic. So let's go back to our chart here. So insulin's our hormone comes from our pancreas, it's pulling the glucose from the cells, and then it's trying to get the glucose into the cell. Anything left over that the cells don't need, or that the cell isn't opening up to listen to, is going in to be stored as fat. And that is how fat is formed. So now let's just break this down into even easier language. Carbohydrates are glucose, period. It's its first number one job. Carbohydrates spike insulin. Insulin stores fat. We have become a nation that are carbohydrate happy, and it's causing addictions. And so now we're in this vicious cycle of storing fat and becoming immune. So if we're pre-diabetic and our cells aren't allowing that glucose in because it's saying, I can't hear you, I'm too tired of listening to you knock on my door because you eat too much glucose, then you're starving your cells and feeding your fat cells, plain and simple. It's pretty interesting if you really think about it. So now, what do I do? So now that I've told you all this, well, first let me ask you, do you have any questions about that process? I try to make it as simple, but it's really complicated. So I don't do it I do a little bit of a disservice to you because I'm making it so simple, but it's really the bare bones of what you need to know. Does anybody have any question? Okay, cool. So does that mean that carbohydrates are evil? Nope. I am never going to ask you to give up carbs. And that's what keto does, and that's what Atkins does, and that's what makes my program different. I feel like I have figured out a formula that works for people, and I think it's sustainable, because if we remove carbs from our diet the way keto asks us to, it's not sustainable for the rest of your life, and you get your body out of practice from eating healthy carbs. And if you get your body out of practice, the minute you reintroduce them, you gain weight again. It's a response that the body has, and it would take time for your body not to gain weight from eating carbs. So we don't ever want to take them out. What we want to do is balance them and figure out a way for the way they can work inside of your intake. This is going to be different for everybody. And that's why I would like to work with each person uniquely. And I do a lot of tests with you guys. I'll say, okay, let's have you eat carbs here, here, here. And I'm not telling you the word carbs. I'm saying, let's put this type of food source in here. And then I kind of see how your body reacts. And then we adjust from there. For example, Anna's body needs at least 90 grams of carbs a day. And you guys don't need to worry about the grams and all that, but just to give you an example, she needs at least to be able to lose weight and to lean out. I can only do 30. So I have to be on a more bare minimum, but she has to be on a more of a bigger amount. And so everyone's unique, and unless I work with you individually, I would never know that. And that's why I like this doing AtoZ FITT the way we do it. So with all that put aside, you don't even need that. What you need is this plate. So this is the way we're gonna want to design our meals. Half of our plate's gonna be vegetables. Vegetables contain residual carbs. A lot of diets, quote unquote, will say, well, you can only have this vegetable or that vegetable because these vegetables are higher in carbs and blah, blah, blah. Throw that out the window. I have designed it so that you have 4 categories: proteins, fats. This is my way of doing it: proteins, fats, carbohydrates, and vegetables. So the vegetables lives in a category all of its own, and it's extremely successful for my clients. The only vegetables you want to remove from that is the root vegetables, corn and legumes and beans. So those vegetables fall into the complex carbohydrates. But anything in this picture here, like you're looking at greens and broccolis and cabbages and tomatoes and cucumbers and eggplant and celery root. Oh, I do see apples in there. So any green vegetables, carrots, those kinds of things are always going to be half your plate. And don't worry about the carbohydrate intake in them. Just eat them unlimited. And then about 2/3 of your plate is going to come from, 1/3 of your plate is going to be meats and healthy fats. So those can be anything from obviously fish and beef and chicken and poultry and eggs, and then the healthy fat's going to be olive oils, nuts, seeds, avocados, that kind of thing. That's going to be about 1/3 of your plate. And then the other small 6 of your plate is going to be your carbohydrate. So that's going to be where these unrefined ancient grains are going to come in. The quinoas, the wild rice, the brown rices, oats, barley, and that's also where your root vegetables are going to come in. And if you guys read the group board last week, I believe, when we started the vegetable challenge, I did a nice description that you guys can go back and pull from that. I listed out ones that we would consider carbohydrates that are vegetables. Sweet potatoes, white potatoes, beets, butternut squash, acorn squashes. What else? I'm drawing a blank. The only two, sorry, beans and legumes. So beans and legumes are like lentils and things like that. Those have a 1-to-4 ratio of protein to healthy carbs. So they're always going to be considered a carb that carries protein. So black beans, pinto beans, lentils, those kinds of things are your complex carbs. Peas. And the I lost my train of thought. Oh, and fruits. So fruits are always going to be a complex carb as well. Fruits carry sugar in them, and the sugar is a certain type of sugar, and it's paired with a fiber. So it affects your blood glucose differently. So instead of it being such a high spike like this blood glucose green line is, it's going to actually be smaller and carry out a little bit longer. So that's the ins and outs about fruit. Now, a lot of people say, you can't have fruit if you're on if you're trying to lose weight. But that's not true. And it's definitely not true. So I want you guys to make sure that you're getting 1 portion of fruit. Now, we don't want to have 3 portions of fruit a day. That might impact our weight loss, but 1 portion of fruit a day is good. What else was I going to say about root vegetables? I can't remember. Does anybody have any question about these? So where does that leave processed carbs and refried grains and all that? So I love jasmine rice, which is a white rice, and it's been a process. And I like it with my Thai food. So I will have that as a treat. I will have it occasionally. I'll have it once a week or once a month or wherever I'm at in my cycle. So you have room for these treats. You just don't want to have them on a daily basis. We want to think about these root vegetables and these fruits and these legumes and beans and grains as being something that we have as our complex carb in our meals throughout the day. Okay. So let's kind of recap that. So we have 3 macronutrients that make up our foods: proteins, fats, carbs. For 50,000 plus years of evolution, proteins and fats were our main source of fuel. So our bodies like that. Our gut biome, it likes that. For less than 200 years, carbs have been our main source of food. So that's something new. Our bodies are like, we'll show you if you keep doing that. So the proteins and fats do not spike glucose levels, which gives us a longer fuel burn. It keeps us away from cravings. It keeps us from feeling that addiction of empty fuel, like, oh my God, I'm still hungry. I need to eat, more calories, more calories. And then the carbs spike the glucose, give us instant energy, which spikes insulin, and then insulin stores glucose as fat when it's not being used. So that's kind of a recap. That picture on the right is a really beautiful way of saying, hey, listen, healthy food does not have to be boring. And you guys have gotten really good at making some healthy meals, but that's some greens and some peas. The peas are the complex carb there. The grains, and you've got your salmon, and then you've got a nice little yogurt dill dip. Perfect, right? And so we're just kind of thinking about a healthy plate in this manner. Doesn't mean you have to be perfect all the time. So that's the presentation. Yay! I'm going to actually leave my screen on here for a second in case anybody has any questions. I can go back to some slides if you need me to. Does anybody have any thoughts or comments or questions?
I think you made it pretty easy to understand.
Yay! Thanks, Donna.
Yeah. I guess, is it better to eat your complex carb earlier in the day than later in the day?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we're at the point with some of you guys, and some of you guys I haven't gotten to that point with, but we want to take our nutrition in step-by-step intervals. So it is, if the first step is always going to be from transferring from processed foods to whole foods, right? So that's our number one step. And I don't care what that looks like. Like, don't even think about where your food is lying. We just want to make sure that we transfer it over. The second step is in kind of manipulating a few things to help your body be more proactive. And as we progress, and if I haven't talked to you guys about this yet, then we don't really need to be there yet. But as you progress, we'll want to remove our complex carbs away from dinner and move it more towards, afternoon snack and before. So just depending on where you're at in your journey. Because what I try to do with each individual is keep them from plateauing. So our bodies have a natural response to plateau because it doesn't want to leave. It doesn't want to remove those fat cells. Fat cells means survival in primitive man. So for 52,000 years, we had to deal with drought and lack of game and all of those things. And so our bodies would say, okay, I need to stop you from losing weight or else I'm going to die. We still have those mechanisms. So to do that, that's why we just kind of tweak on things slowly so that your body, when it does plateau, I can move something else. That's why diets fail. If I take you from here, from where you were eating all these processed foods to boom, exactly where you need to be eating as an athlete, all this room in here between we've skipped, and you're going to plateau fast. And I have nothing to do. So that's kind of how that works. A good question, Sherry. Anybody else? No?
That question is a little off this, but I just wondering, when I log my food into my FitPal, should our exercise be logged as well? Because it'll, I know we're not paying attention to calories right now, but
Yeah.
Does matter.
Yeah. So I think you broke up a little bit, but I'm going to repeat your question. You said right now your MyFitnessPal is subtracting out your exercise calories. And so you're saying, do I need to be counting that, right?
Well, I'm not adding it in. Should we add it in?
No. Nope.
Okay.
So exercise.
But I thought.
Yep. Yep, exactly. So exercise calories, we never want to deduct because it's really not that many. And to be honest with you, exercise is a body composition change and it's a internal health change for you. But weight loss happens with food.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll want to keep our calorie content stable without the exercise taken out. Good question. Anybody else?
I had a question around, you talked about the number of carbs that Anna needs versus you. Was that just over time with MyFitnessPal that you found out, all right, she plateaued here? How did you figure out what she needed?
Yeah, it's trial and error.
Yeah.
So, and that's why I like to work with each person uniquely. And when I get to a point of, okay, so let's, I'm going to use an AtoZ FITT client as an example. She's been with us since October, and she transferred all of her food over to Whole Foods, and she is very good about it. She still has her one treat meal a week, and then she stays Whole Foods. And then I started doing a little meal planning where I manipulated some things, and then now, so we're into almost March, I've started counting carbohydrates for her. So it took us, 6 months to really get to that point. So, and everyone's different. If you're losing weight, we don't want to mess with anything, right? Because the weight loss is an indication that you're on the right path. It's just a data point for me. It's a result of your habits that you're doing. And if you get stuck, and you're still doing those habits that you were doing to make you lose weight, that to me is a plateau and we need to shift something. But so over time, I mean, I've worked with Anna's nutrition for 2 years now, and she was already at this whole food spot when we came together. And so she would document for me how she would feel and on certain days, and I would be doing some different macro counting for her, and I would apply it, and then she would tell me, I'm cranky as a bear, I can't take it, and blah, 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 and she wouldn't lose weight if I would drop her too low. So we know to keep her at a certain level. She and I have pretty much we've been able to narrow things down because we work so closely together. So we've got a good plan going, and that comes way later. So right now, for where we're at with you guys, we're just working on, manipulating where we have our food sources, making sure they're whole foods, and everybody's at a different point than that. If you're able to eat, let's say, I know this isn't your question, but I'm just kind of going off your question. Sorry, Madi, but if you're able to eat, let's say you're able to eat a bag of pretzels. I'm trying to think of a healthy snack like that could be considered ish healthy, and you're still able to lose weight. We don't want to mess with that right then. Okay, so once you stop losing weight, then we'll want to just kind of shift from there. So the ultimate is macro counting. That's the ultimate. That's why I tell you guys never to look at the macros on your MyFitnessPal, because that is like, I've done everything that I can up until this point. I hope that helps.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's why you're so big into the how are you feeling before you eat question.
Yes.
Right? Uh-huh.
Yes. Big time. Big time. I want to know, what your energy levels are. I want to know how hungry you are. That kind of thing. Yep.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for the question. Anything else you guys think of? Yay. Well, I loved being here with you guys. Thank you so much for having me, and I hope that it was educational and wasn't a waste of your 50 minutes.
No, it was good.
Yay. Okay. Well, thanks for being my people today.
Thank you.
All right.
Yes,
We
thank you.
love you.
Oh, I love you guys.
Thank you, Sherry.
Happy wedding.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Sherry. I really appreciate that. And when while I'm gone, a couple of things. Just really work on meal prepping and your whole food intakes. And Anna's going to ask you about that in 2 weeks. And then when I come back, yay, we'll pick it back up. Okay. Bye, guys.
Good luck.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks for coming, Marty. I appreciate that.